You're watching Booze Hackers. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Tonight we're talking sparkling wine. And Adrian, you've mentioned to me in the past that sparkling wine has not really been anything you've either liked or encountered. You want to give some background on that? Is there things that you don't like, or just what's your feelings on that?
Yeah, generally, I think for me, as well as a lot of, I would guess a lot of people, it's something that you have on special occasions, and you don't really so much choose it as you grab something 4 hours before you need it, or 30 minutes before you need it on the way to somebody's house for a New Year's
Right.
party or something like that, or for a special occasion, and you just grab some Corbel or whatever one or two names look familiar to you. In general, I don't like stuff that's real sweet. I'm not a big fan of rosés, not a big fan of liqueurs, you were telling me there's a way to tell by looking at the bottle, what's more sweet or less sweet.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a sweetness scale, and we can get into that as we get into the discussion. Are you a wine drinker at all, or mostly just beer and liquor?
No, I like there's something in every category that I like.
Okay.
As far as wine goes, I'm definitely more of a red wine kind of guy.
Okay.
Yeah, I like reds. I like cabs are probably my favorite.
Okay. So the sparkling wine universe tends to be on the opposite scale of what a cab would be.
Right.
They tend to be much lighter, not necessarily sweeter. You certainly can get sweet, but you're not going to get that deep earthy tone. You're going to get a light, crisp flavor out of most sparkling wines. There is one red sparkling wine. I think it's Italian that I hate with a
Oh, really?
passion. It's called Rosa Regale, and it's exactly what you described. It's essentially a red wine, but it is sugar water, in my opinion.
Oh,
It is just this red, sweet, syrupy. Ugh. A lot of people love it, not for me, but it is a pretty popular sparkling wine, especially in bars. It's very well distributed. So there's a lot of times you'll see that as kind of oh, we've got a bargain sparkling wine, and oh, okay, sure. And it's like, no, you might as well just give me sugar water and
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Cup of grape juice.
right, exactly. So
Yeah.
so in my opinion, my wife and I joke about this all the time. Don't oh yeah, don't remember Rosa Regale is the stuff we hate. Yes. So move on. So I already have an open bottle of sparkling wine here. So this is Mom. This is out in Napa Valley. They're a pretty big producer out of Napa Valley, and this is actually a rosé. And rosés, I will say this is probably a little bit sweeter than their normal brut, but it is a pretty good wine. It's usually in the, I want to say, $20 a bottle range. But my wife got these at a local big box shop the other day for like $13 a pop. So she's like, I felt
Okay.
like I was stealing them as I walked out. Um,
Okay.
but
Well, since
so
you're pouring
pouring
something, I'm
that.
I'm going to go ahead and pour something as well.
Okay.
And what I've got here is I think you have a bottle of this as well,
Correct. So
but
that's,
I've got the small bottle. You have the full size bottle,
yes.
but it's a Chandon, California Brut.
Yep. So
I hope
again,
I said that right.
another American sparkling wine. Shandon is a very big producer. And one of the interesting things about Shandon is that they're actually owned. They were started by one of the very large French champagne houses, Moet and Chandon. And this is basically their American version of that. Yeah, the small bottles come with a little weird twist cap because the pressure isn't there to warrant the full thing.
Oh,
So, I haven't seen that before.
so a little bit came out, but I haven't unscrewed the cap yet. So that's interesting.
Yeah, usually that whole big piece of plastic is connected on the little. So those are, if I get my terminology correct, those are called splits. And I think they're about a third of a bottle, maybe a quarter of a bottle. I
This
mean,
it looks like yeah, it looks like less than half a bottle, not quite 350 milliliters. It doesn't actually say.
okay.
The price was about a third, so I would expect about a third.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I forget exactly what a split is. I'll put some in the show notes. There's actually, I think, 7 different bottle sizes that sparkling wine comes in,
Oh wow.
and the largest one is, you can't
Yeah, I've
see my
seen those.
hands, but it's gigantic, and it's something like 20 bottles of wine in one bottle. And the last time I looked at them, what happens is they actually break open a bunch of normal size bottles and then pour them all into a big bottle instead
Oh
of
really?
aging them inside a big bottle. So it's more of a like a for show type thing, right? We come out with a gigantic bottle of wine at the restaurant, pop the
Right.
cork, all this other stuff. So
So I used to work at a nice Italian restaurant, and we had these gigantic bottles of wine, and I never saw anybody open them. Some of them were close to the wood fired pizza oven where I cooked.
right, and you're
So,
you're like,
yeah,
they got to be vinegar at that point.
yeah, yeah. I figured they were just for show. I didn't know if there's any actual wine in them, but yeah, some of them are enormous. Like no single person is even gonna
Right. Yeah.
even
It's
carry them.
for, hey, we've got a party of 30, and so well, so cheers.
Cheers.
Tink. So I'll be interested to see what your thoughts are there.
You got to drink after cheers. That's a party foul. Depending on how superstitious you get, like potential bad things from not drinking after after raising your glass.
So initial thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's there's just not been a whole lot going on as far as flavor in a lot of the sparkling wines that I've had,
Mm-hmm.
and I think maybe once in my life have I had one where the taste was actually notable, where it was something where I would ask for another glass. Um, but yeah, no, I like this. This is
Okay.
good.
So Shandong's interesting. We can usually find it at our local big box for around 13 to 15, but I've seen it anywhere up to 23. At a small liquor store that maybe doesn't have a whole lot of product or whatever, and that may be the only thing they have. But again, Shandong's it's an American sparkling wine that is actually owned by a French champagne house. So Champagne is obviously the famous of the sparkling wines, kind of like we talk about Kentucky bourbon,
Sure.
right? Everybody, oh, Kentucky bourbon they don't necessarily know what it is, but they've heard of Kentucky bourbon, right? And so almost everybody's heard of Champagne. Um, Champagne has a very specific appellation of the Champagne region in France, and it was designated as an appellation in the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War One. So it said you can only call wine that comes from this area that uses the traditional champagne method as champagne. The interesting thing about that, though, is that the U.S. never signed that treaty.
Sure.
So the U.S. was able to produce sparkling wine and call it champagne for a good number of years. And then what happened let me look at my,
And then it started another war.
yeah, yeah. So that was in 1919. So in 2006, the U.S. signed a wine trade agreement with the European Union, and this got brought up. And so the United States basically signed an agreement that said we're not going to allow new uses of certain terms that were previously considered to be semi-generic, such as champagne, Burgundy, Chablis, Port, Chianti, right? So all these kind of European wines that we think about, the U.S. in 2006 said, okay, well, we're not going to call anything new. So the important thing there, though, is they grandfathered everybody else in.
Right.
So Corbel, that you kind of mentioned and Corbel's got, they're definitely on the lower end, but they've got some nicer things than their traditional just $5 a bottle
Yeah.
swill. But they can call it champagne because they were calling it champagne for years, and they got grandfathered into that treaty. So
Right.
like some of the other appellation discussions we've had, there's politics behind it, there's tradition
Sure.
behind it, right? All sorts of things. So, but in the grandest sense, you can only get champagne from the Champagne region, and it has to be made in a certain way, and it's called the traditional method. And so
Okay.
when you're looking at a bottle, and even so, let me pull up this bottle of Chandon that you may have. So on the back of my bottle of Chandon, it says crafted with méthode, and my French is going to be horrible, but basically the traditional method. It says that right on the back. Uh,
Yeah, mine.
if we can
There's none on.
focus
Yeah, I don't
on that
think there's
little
enough
bottle, there may
room on
not
the
be
back of
enough.
mine.
Yeah. And so that's really when we go through the history of wine, through my research was interesting, was that all of these vineyards were actually losing bottles of wine because they did not understand the property of yeast. So we've got a pretty good understanding of yeast today. We know how it interacts. We know we feed it
Right.
sugar. It creates carbon dioxide. It does all this other stuff, right? All these breweries exist solely because of yeast, et cetera. The winemakers had no clue. When you look at the 1300s, 1400s,
Right.
nobody had any idea why these bottles were exploding in the caves and all this other stuff. And so one of the items I read was Dom Perignon. It was actually a French monk who's credited with coming up with champagne, with sparkling wine, but he actually spent the bulk of his career trying to prevent champagne from happening, right? Because they were losing bottle after
Right.
bottle through
Right.
explosions, et cetera. So it's kind of funny. He's got this reputation of being the champagne originator, but in reality, it sounds like he was actually figured out why it was happening versus we want this to happen. It was we don't want this to happen. And so as we go through the years, that legend has kind of taken off, et cetera.
So towards the end of his career, he fashions a rough wire wrap to keep.
That may be true.
He
I
invents
don't
that at
know
the end.
enough
He's like,
details
screw it.
there.
Like, let's force that cork to stay in.
Well, and so there's a very traditional way of wrapping that wire. I think it's 5.5 twists.
Oh wow!
And so we were at one of our preferred American sparkling wine vineyards out in Sonoma, and we were getting the tour, and she's like, "Yes, just every bottle of sparkling wine, it's 5.5 twists of that wire."
Wow.
And so I'm a little bit OCD, and so I will count it every time I undo one. I'm like, "Yep, there's 5.5 twists," so whatever it is. But so champagne, though, is just a fraction of the sparkling wine that's being sold across the world. One of the other big names is Prosecco. And so that's an Italian sparkling wine, and it's actually named after the Prosecco grape.
Is that a brand or a type?
So, well, it's an Italian appellation again, but it is named after that grape. So
Okay.
It is the Prosecco grape, but generally uses the traditional method as well. And most of the wines I'm going to talk about today use the traditional method. But the flip side of the traditional method is kind of like how they make soft drink, is that they have a big vat and they shoot carbon dioxide in it, and they keep it pressurized through the entire process, and then they pop it into a bottle, right? So it's, instead of letting that sugar naturally ferment with the yeast to add CO2, they're actually just injecting CO2, and that way they can get that stuff to the market much quicker. One of the notices that you'll notice on an injected one is that the bubbles tend to be much bigger. They're going to look like a soft drink, like a Coca-Cola bubble, right? They're pretty big, versus, on the glass I'm looking at, I don't even think you can see it, but the bubbles are pretty fine. And so
I can't say that I've ever looked super close at a soda's bubbles, but I would say that these are probably finer.
Yeah. So those are the two major ways of producing sparkling wine. But like
so a few questions before you
Sure.
dive too much deeper. So sparkling wine, Is it a specific type of white wine that's used to make sparkling wine? Can any white wine be made into sparkling wine?
Any wine, any grape could be used
Okay.
to make sparkling wine. There's no, again, it's CO2 within your grapes. I mean, you could sit at home and pour your red wine into a container, inject CO2 into it, and then you got sparkling wine, right? There's
But
no,
I mean, industry wise, is there like like if you pick something up, is it always going to be a certain varietal of white grape?
it tends to be Chardonnay with some
Okay.
Pinot Noir. So especially when you're talking about Champagne, they're really Chardonnay based with Pinot Noir grapes.
Okay.
So maybe like a 80-30, or sorry, 70-30, 80-20 type split.
I'm looking at this bottle I've got.
And it may tell you there.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. So this is another bottle that I got at Emilo, which is also I'm also probably mispronouncing, and made with the traditional method. It is also a California sparkling wine. It says number 2. I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means either.
But it's 56% Chardonnay, 44% Pinot Noir.
There you go. So those are the two traditional. Again, like we said with Prosecco is really with the Prosecco grape. The Italians have another sparkling wine called Spumante, which you are not going to want to ever touch.
And
yep, there's your
5.5 twists.
Yep.
If we can get that in.
Yeah, it's kind of focused. Not quite.
Yeah. It's because I'm in the frame. If I step out of the frame, it'll focus.
There you go.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got another bear bottle here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5.5. So depending on the region, obviously, what kind of grapes grow in that region is going to be a little bit different. The Spanish have a sparkling wine called Cava, I believe. And then Napa, Sonoma, New Mexico, we just call them American sparkling.
Right.
There's no fancy name to give to them, etc. But to recap, Champagne comes from a very specific region within France using a very specific methodology. There's a couple of very big famous champagne houses. So again, Moet and Chandon. You've got Tattinger. You've got Dom Perignon, right? All these big names that people have heard of. Pierre Juliet. But the other thing too that happens, just like in the rest of the world, right, is they all get consolidated at some point as well.
Yeah.
So there may be one brand that owns, 10 other brands.
You could almost do a separate podcast just on the industry side of things, and who owns who, and where the juice comes from, and this brand is just like that brand but a year older in the barrel.
Yeah. So that's actually a great point. Is you'll hear the term grower champagne. And that means the farm, literally the vineyard that grew the grapes, are also the one that produced it. So again, even those big names can't supply all the grapes that they need to produce, right? And so they're buying up stock of grapes from all these growers across the Champagne region, et cetera. So that's
this one particularly says what counties the grapes came from there. Yep. So you can see some from Sonoma,
Santa Barbara, and Monterey.
Yeah. 2% from Monterey, 51% Sonoma, 47% Santa Barbara. Monterey came in at the last minute and saved the batch.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing that sparkling wine tends to use a lot is a lot of blends. So you'll see a lot of non-age statements as we talk about, like, kind of a comparison to whiskey. We go, oh, hey, this is a 7-year-old aged whiskey. A lot of times you're going to see NV. So it's not going to have an age statement on the bottle because it's a blend of grapes or blends of wines over a variety of years.
Okay.
So for whatever reason, that's
NV,
pretty common.
You said?
NV.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember. it just slipped my head what NV stands for. But a lot of times you're not going to see, like, especially under the sub 100 range, my guess is that, oh, hey, you've got a 1999 Dom Perignon. Well, that's probably a $500 bottle of champagne or something, but a lot of
Non-vintage.
non-vintage. Thank you. That's it.
Mhm.
So it's not going to have a year statement on it. Um, that doesn't mean it's not good. It just means they're blending it. So again, when we talk
Right.
about Scotch being single malt, right? The single malt means it all came from the same distillery. That's kind of like what that growers terminology was that I used before, which is, hey, this all came from the same farm. They put it together. And we've had some really good grower champagne, but those are coming from usually smaller farms, names you don't ever hear,
Right.
just because, like everything, the big names dominate the field, and then everybody else is there picking up the 10% scrap.
Right.
So the other interesting thing is that the style of sparkling wine has changed over the years, and our glassware has kind of reflected that. So if you've ever seen the picture, I think it's Leonardo DiCaprio with his glass with the Great Gatsby, and he's
Yep.
got what we call a coupe glass. So it's almost like a martini glass, but it's rounded and it's flat, and those were used a lot in the 1920s, 30s, but the sparkling wine had a different texture. My understanding is it wasn't quite as carbonated as what we have today. And so that really allowed the wine to open up quite a bit, but it also, even then it had the less bubbles, those bubbles would dissipate pretty quickly as well. So our styles have changed to a slightly more carbonated wine, and now we all use flutes
Right.
to keep those bubbles intact a little bit more, right? So now they have to crawl the entire way up the flute to escape. And so the flavor is supposed to be a little bit lighter versus that older style of sparkling wine with the larger glass, etc. Now, I also have here a tulip glass that is supposed to be somewhat of a compromise between the two. You can see it starts wide and then compresses and then it opens back up at the top. And so it's supposed to let that flavor out. I'll be honest, I'm not sure I've ever been able to tell the difference between the taste in a
Right.
flute versus a tulip glass, but yeah.
Yeah. Leo seems pretty happy with his glass.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd never really considered what was in his glass in that scene and what the type of glass was, but that's interesting.
Yeah. So it also means you can spill it a lot easier. That wide. I've been in enough places where you're trying to do something. You've got this wide glass, and your drink is just
Right.
right, and it's like all over the place. To me, that's the number one reason to have the flute is you're probably not going to spill the flute, right? I can tilt all the way over to that point without spilling anything. So,
right.
So we're pretty good there. So we've talked a little bit about the glasses. We talked a little bit about the styles and how that is made. I wanted to touch a little bit on branding and some of the brands I'm familiar with. So we talked a little bit about Moet and Chandon. And like we said, we both have a bottle of Chandon here. And so this is really a French brand that is being grown in Napa, bottled, et cetera, aged in Napa. So it's a California sparkling wine, but it's really coming from expertise from Champagne area. The other one I have in a similar way is a brand called Gruet. Okay. And so these are two different styles of Gruet, but they are a New Mexico vineyard. And originally the family came from France and settled in the region and said, wow, we can, it's very similar to the hills of France. We can grow a very similar grape, have very similar weather. to the Champagne region. And to me, that's one of our favorite brands of sparkling wine. We can, there's a website out there called Casemates. I'm sure you're familiar with
Yeah.
woot.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
So woot.com used to have a wine.woot.com.
Yep.
And when they sold out to Amazon, Amazon basically said, we're not interested in the wine part of the business, and dropped that from Woot. Well, the guys who founded that went off and started a new website called Casemates.
Ah, I
And
didn't know that.
so you can
I
go to
didn't even know
Case.
that Woot sold to Amazon. I didn't
Yeah, okay,
realize
yeah.
that.
So Woot sold to Amazon, gosh, 5-6 years ago.
Okay.
Um, and so they went off and started a new site called Casemates. And essentially what Wine.Woot and Casemates does is they find wines that don't get great distribution, and they put together some kind of package deal. And you can usually buy either a case or half a case of something, have it shipped to your house.
Right.
Now you're dealing with all the distribution laws across the country. So depending on where the wine's coming from and depending on where you live, you may or may not be able to get that. But they often have a case of Grey, and when we buy it by the case, we can get it for $12 a bottle.
Okay.
Normally in your liquor store, you're paying $18 to $22 a bottle for the Gruet. And they've got
So,
a variety of styles, etc.
so for you, is this is sparkling wine an everyday wine for you and your wife, or
Yes.
special occasion, like sort
Nope.
of special occasion, just normal every day?
Normal every day.
Okay.
We prefer it over most things. One of the interesting things about sparkling wine too, because of the way the yeast and the carbon dioxide work, it tends to be a lower alcohol as well. So when you're
Huh.
talking about, okay, I want to have a couple of glasses of wine tonight versus a heavy cab or something, usually a couple of glasses of sparkling has got some lower alcohol content to it. And this bottle from
Yeah,
Gruet is called Sauvage, and it's got zero residual sugar in it. So they do not add any sugar to this. So it ends up being a little less sparkly because it doesn't generate as much CO2, but
mhm.
it also has less alcohol in it because of that as well. That's my understanding. Uh, so that's one of our go-to brands. The Shandon is one of our go-to brands. The Mum is one of our go-to brands. This bottle, so Saint Hilaire, is very interesting. If I can get it without too much, I'm gonna get all sorts of
Yeah.
things there. But so Saint Hilaire claims they are essentially the originators of sparkling wine. So it's
Oh
a
wow.
French sparkling wine, but it's not made in Champagne. So they can't call it Champagne. They call it product of France, white sparkling wine with the traditional method. So you can usually find this from anywhere from $9 to $15 a bottle. And to me, this is one of the best bargains you're going to get.
Hmm.
I don't think it's an amazing wine, but I think at the price point, it's a very good bottle of wine.
So I'm gonna compare this other one,
Okay.
also a California wine, to the one I just had, which I have finished a little faster than I would normally because I'm kind of excited to
Yeah,
compare
I'm
here.
interested to see how that turns out for you.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and
Don't put your head over the top.
this is not a good place to spill. So expertly done. I
There
have
you
done
go.
that quite a few times. So
You didn't have the saber, so
no, not going to try that.
I'm not sure I've ever seen that in person. So
I haven't. I I've got a machete and it's fairly sharp, but I'm not going to try it.
yeah, no, it's very specific thing.
So this is very similar. It's also 12%. I don't think the Shandon here said what the grapes were.
Um,
Yours might. Your label has more information than mine does because I've got the small bottle.
yeah. Nope, it does not tell me.
Very bubbly.
But my guess is it's mostly Chardonnay. Yep. Oh wow, that is very bubbly.
Yeah, it's quite good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I don't have the vocabulary to describe the differences, but definitely a lot more body, a lot more flavor going on there. I'm not sure if you can tell, but the color is richer and
Yes.
darker. So it's probably coming from the different blend of grapes.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up after the show. The other two bottles I have here, I've got one that we bought just for the name. So that's my last name. So my wife saw this in the liquor store, Finky's
Yeah.
Widow. So she's like, we have to buy this. I was like, okay. Um,
Your wife bought a bottle of Fink's Widow.
Finky's Widow, yes. So it wasn't very good. So I'm not feeling the pressure there. But this other bottle, this is one of my favorite bottles I've ever bought. And if I had known it was going to be this good, we're fortunate we've got a large liquor store by the house, and their wine department is actually run by a certified sommelier.
Okay.
And so he knows very much what he's looking for, et cetera, what the big names are, what are good deals, et cetera. And he found this stuff. I think had been sitting in the warehouse because some shipment fell through or something, and found it and bought the whole thing. And so they were selling this. So this is Roeder Estate. So again, this is another brand that is owned by a French champagne house that came over to the U.S. and stood up some vineyards here. I spent, I think, $20 on this bottle. And if I had known how good it was going to be, I would have gone back and bought a case. And in fact,
Right.
I took the bottle in and talked to him, and he was like, yeah, dude, that was a once in a lifetime deal. I just happened to get the distribution. The distributor had it sitting around. No one was buying it. I saw what a deal it was. So I got it. And I'm like, well, crap. The other brand that we drink quite a bit that's actually a step up in price, I don't have a bottle with me right now, is called Iron Horse. So again, it's
Mm-hmm.
out of Sonoma County. And this is a very personal brand to my wife and I, but it's also kind of a personal brand to the country in that Iron Horse supplied for years. I'm not sure if they still do, but they supply what was called fairy tale sparkling wine to Walt Disney World. So when you went to
Okay.
Walt Disney World and you got a glass of fairy tale sparkling wine, that was coming from Iron Horse. So we always, every time we saw Iron Horse, we'd go buy a bottle because, okay, that was what we had at our wedding. My wife and I got married at Disney World. So it was a very personal brand to us. But the other interesting thing is that their Russian cuvee was served at the White House when Reagan hosted Gorbachev. So that was the sparkling, that was what they put on the table at the White House as they were talking about how do we, end the Cold War essentially, right? So to me, that's a very important American heritage wine. I believe it's still served at the White House.
Yeah.
And those bottles run anywhere from 30 to 50, and then they've got some advanced bottles that are in the 80 to 90 range as well.
Yeah. I'm looking at it on Total Wine right now. It looks like we can't get it here, but yeah, definitely. Yeah, this one's $33.50, and then there's another one here for $43.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they also do
Different
some,
years.
they do some specialty ones. So we had one that was like a wildlife version. And so, like a certain percentage they would donate to preservations.
Okay.
They had one for LGBTQT, so would donate some money to that. Obviously, being close to the San Francisco area. Just is, I think they're on their third generation of family at this point. Um, in my opinion, just beautiful wines, but it is definitely a touch higher than in the price context than anything else we've talked about today. So
Yeah. Yeah. I see they have a Russian cuvee also. Oh, yeah.
yeah, so that's the one.
Originally named for the historic Reagan Gorbachev summit
Yeah,
meetings.
yeah. So I think that's around 50 to 55, depending on the distributor, but that's a very nice bottle of sparkling wine. And so earlier you asked kind of, do you use these in celebration or are they every day? There's definitely something like an Iron Horse, like that
Right.
would be, hey,
Yeah. Different brands, different price points.
right, something special happened. We'll break out a bottle of that. When one of our cats passed away, we broke open a bottle of Iron Horse. But for daily drinkers, the Chandons, the Mums, the Saint Hilars, there's even some stuff like, we've kind of talked about Corbel a little bit. There's, again, some of their upper level wines, which are really in the $15 range, aren't bad for what they are. Again, it's like, are you in the mood for some Jim Beam, or do you want Booker's, right? I mean, there's
Right.
definitely a different price point there, and how much are you going to drink that night?
Yeah.
So the last thing really to cover, in my opinion, is the sweetness scale. So you already kind of mentioned on your bottle, right? There's probably a word like brute
Yep.
on there, right? So there, now this is unregulated, so you can kind of pretty much put whatever you want on there. But I think most people do try to follow the scale, the kind of the prescribed scale, because you've got extra brute is your really dry, and that's really going to be like this Sauvage that I have is going to be in that extra brute
Yeah. You were saying
level.
they don't put any extra sugars after bottling
Correct.
or during bottling.
Correct. And then brute is the next. And so most sparkling wines that I drink that are going to be tasty to me are in that brute to extra brute. Ironically, the next level up in sweetness is called extra dry, which makes no sense to me. But that's really in the lower middle scale of sweetness,
Yeah.
and that's about as sweet as I get. Again, this Mum that I'm drinking, that's a rosé, is a brut rosé, and to me it tastes pretty sweet already. The next three up are called sec, and then demi sec, and then doux. And at that point, I think you're just drinking sugar water. I don't know what the value is that you're getting out of that. And there are people who like to drink that type of stuff, but to
Yeah.
me, it's just, at that point, they're dessert wines or something.
Right. Yeah. And I don't mind, stuff like port, but
Right.
that's a different consistency
And that's a
than a
different
wine.
purpose and a different,
Mhm.
right. That's an after dinner drink. You're
Different
calming
glass,
everything
different
down.
pour. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
any other questions from you? You're enjoying the new one?
I
What's your
am. I
comparison?
am. And it's interesting you mentioned talking about the sweetness scale. Before moments before I bought this stuff, I hit you up and said, what am I buying? What should I get? And you mentioned the sweetness scale, and that's exactly what I needed to know because I don't like super sweet stuff.
Yeah.
And this Emolo or Emolo doesn't say brute There's nothing on the bottle
That's very
that
odd.
would tell you what the sweetness is. But I recall it was the label on the shelf that had the price on it and
Okay.
said brut on it. So that's how I knew it was a less sweet.
Okay.
But yeah, no other questions. It's yeah, no, this has been fun. I've not generally all the times I've had sparkling wine has been when I feel like I had to have sparkling wine
Right.
because the occasion demanded it,
Right.
So it's things taste different when you're drinking it on your own terms or you're eating something on your own terms. I remember growing up, I hated tomatoes. Like I would not eat tomatoes in anything, and I was just a terror to my mother. And then I moved out of the house and I learned I actually like tomatoes.
Yeah.
Like I refused to eat it. It tasted differently because I was being forced to eat it. And then all of a sudden I realized, no, I actually don't have anything about tomatoes. It's just I have something against being told that I needed to eat something.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just people tend to grab the cheap stuff, the stuff that isn't interesting. My tastes tend to run towards the more extreme versions of things. I like things that are very sour, very bitter, very spicy.
Right.
So yeah, like when I met my wife, she said, I told her I didn't like beer, and she said, "Oh, you just haven't had the right kind."
Yeah.
And that's I've kind of carried that with me, and when I taste something, I think, oh, maybe it's not that I don't like hummus, I just don't like this hummus.
Yeah, I mean, taste is so subjective, and again, with all of this stuff, right, is you can get into brand snobbery. You can, I'm only going to drink Cristal, or I'm only going to drink Dom Perignon,
The
or
type of glass.
yeah, exactly. And at some point, I've been on a catamaran in the middle of the Caribbean with a glass of Corbel, and gosh darn it,
Well, that changes the taste too.
that was
The
amazing,
surroundings.
right? It's 90 degrees, you're sitting in the sun and you got an ice cold glass of some cheap sparkling wine. Okay, it's fine. But yeah,
That
do
works.
I
Yeah.
want to sit there at some 4-star, 5-star dinner drinking Corbel? Probably not. I'm gonna drink something a little bit nicer. But just like we've talked in the past, is we can play that game with just about any topic, whether it's tequila, scotch, bourbon, whatever. Is there's different flavor profiles and different price points, and they all come with different considerations. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I got nothing else to add. This is fun for me.
awesome. Well, I hope you now are a sparkling wine drinker, because we like it.
Yeah.
We drink way too much of it. So
I'll share the load.
okay. Well, cheers everybody, and thank you for watching. We appreciate it.
Have a good holiday. And yeah, cheers.